Welcome back to webinars. Here we are again after 246 of them. We're starting them up, getting the band back together. It's going to be recorded, so if any of you want to share this with your boards or bring it back to your coaching staff, this will be recorded and it'll be up tomorrow. So you'll have access to this whenever you need it. If you need to go back and rehear anything or have any specific questions that you might have missed. We're here because it's been a god-awful, horrible year. The pandemic has affected all of us, and we now are going through our second or third wave and trying to figure out what the future is. Some people have just gotten back to rowing, and now the numbers are screaming and going crazy, and most of us in the north or anywhere near the north are looking at winter training. So while we're here tonight, we wanted to touch base with the coaches from across the country. We wanted to compare and contrast ideas of what's going on with rowing during the pandemic. And we're going to talk about winter training. We're going to discuss some of the best practices currently being used throughout the rowing world and what winter training might look like. And we are going to talk about a little bit about what the spring season will bring to us. For a lot of this, we have a great panel, and for all of this, we are going to have insurance that revolve around not only the guidelines, but also about insurance and what we can and cannot do. So tonight we have a great panel of people. Susan Smith is with us. She's the Chief Domestic Officer. She's been the acting CEO until Amanda joined us, and I think Amanda's on as well. Sarah McCullough is here, and she is working with USRowing and for USRowing and events, and is the liaison with our judge referees, a very important aspect of the regattas. Brett Johnson is here, and Brett does a little bit of everything. He's in communications, he's in events, he's a part of the safety committee, and so he's going to give us some background on our guidelines, how they were created, where they come from, and how they're evolving. Rachel Kelly is here from Assured Partners, and most of you who have USRowing insurance at some point will get to meet her or have spoken to her or throw crazy questions her way. So she's here tonight. She's also, as rumor has it, the best coxswain that Temple University ever had. So Rachel isn't just our insurance liaison, she's also part of the rowing fam. So street creds right there. We are joined tonight by Beatrice Sims from CRI, and who will share some of the risk mitigation and some of the ways that CRI is approaching it. And as we all know, they're the largest club in America, so I'm sure that our problems are a little bit more increased when you add on thousands of people. Matt Logue is here from Three Rivers. Matt is also, not only is he the executive director there, but he's also part of the USRowing Safety Committee. So, throughout this pandemic, they've been meeting regularly and going over aspects of safety. And Richard Hall, the dapper Brit / American, who is out in Washington with Olympia Area Rowing, and to represent the Northwest, because they've done a phenomenal job dealing with the pandemic. And I think there's a lot that he can share with us that we can share with others. So here we are. So I'm going to turn this over to Susan Smith and talk about where we're at now.
Thank you. Greetings from Shenandoah River State Park. I am broadcasting here from our RV, and we too got snow today. It was a surprise. So again, thank you all for coming. I've got two slides that I just want to kind of set the stage with in terms of how USRowing can help the clubs and how we see our role in these past 6 or so months. Where are we now? I don't need to really get into the details. What we know is that we have a winter wave that's breaking all records. Some call it the second wave, some call it the third wave, but it's not good. I just updated these numbers this afternoon. We're at 11 million plus new cases. And that's an additional 151,000. Yesterday it was 132,000. 47.5 cases in the last 7 days per 100,000 cases. That was 46.2 yesterday. 246,000 deaths. Again, an additional 762. And one thing that we haven't been tracking, but I heard today on the news, is that out of all these cases, 1 in 11 cases are kids. Now, kids, many of those who contract coronavirus are either asymptomatic or get a mild case, but they are carriers. Not sure how strong of a carrier, but they are getting the virus and they are carriers. We're seeing in the last couple of days, cities, states are considering new lockdowns. I saw where Philly, which is the area that I'm from, put an end to all youth sports this morning. The good news is prospects are looking positive on 2 fronts, Pfizer and Moderna. And again, this is a serious situation and it's confusing. And what do I mean by confusing? Sarah, you can go to the next page, actually. Um, there's a lot of information out there. The confusing part about it is that some of it's contradictory. We have information from Johns Hopkins, CDC. Um, there's the Harvard Global site. And just trying to wade through all of that information, you think you should be getting numbers that are supporting one another, and the fact is they're different. And I can't say we haven't. I mean, we've tried to substantiate the data, and what we know for sure is that people can't explain to us why they are different. So what we see our role as then is sharing the information that we are getting. And this started back in March. USOPC, FISA, WHO, CDC. Starting in March, USOPC, we were literally having webinars / meetings with USOPC a few times a week. That has come down a bit, but they were sharing a whole lot of information. And what we did then is try to take that information and make it transferable to rowing. And we also had the folks at USOPC see a lot of the information that we were providing, and we got their blessing on it. And that was really the translation part, providing guidance to individuals, to our member clubs. Many of you may not know, but starting back in March, we were having daily meetings first thing in the morning. The coronavirus response team is what we called it. And it included staff from domestic, staff from the national teams. Once a week, we were expanding that group to include our medical commission and our referee corps. So this was a group that really looked at what was going on, the information that we were getting back from our clubs, from many of you that were struggling to understand the information that was coming out. And finally, to facilitate best practices. Again, we have the pleasure of reaching out to many of you to connecting with many folks, top clubs, anyone that, emails us or picks up the phone and calls us. And what we started doing and providing into our website page, COVID page, was information that clubs were sharing with us. And if you ever went to the COVID page, you will see some links from other clubs that, they were pulling together their own protocols, when they were starting to begin training. And so we made those available after asking if we could do that. And what we wanted to be is more of a resource and less of enforcement. What's been very challenging through all of this is that because of the way it was approached, the states are really providing the guidance to all of us. And along with 50 states, we're getting 50 different mandates, 50 different guidelines. So, we wanted to make it clear as to what we saw as necessary and what we provided guidance in. And, getting back to the enforcement, we didn't want to be the sheriff in town. Because again, it was very confusing. These state and regional guidelines, some of them were written very clearly, others were written very fuzzy, very gray. So very, very hard to enforce mandates that, quite frankly, many towns and cities were not enforcing themselves. That said, we did reach out to a number of different clubs who, we were contacted by other clubs to say, hey, I don't think that these clubs are really acting in the spirit of all of this. So we did have conversations. We did that through membership and other ways. And we're able to kind of pull people in line. But I just wanted to make a point that we really saw our role as more of a resource and less of the police. And then providing this information, the sharing, the guidelines, all through our website, which I hope you all have been on. It's been in our homepage rotation since the beginning of March. We've had a number of different versions, and actually Brett, after this, is going to get into all of that, but also sharing that information in our weekly newsletters, email blasts, and daily phone conversations that we've had. So that gives you an idea of, kind of the setting point of where US Rowing saw our role to be.
Next up, we're going to bring Brett Johnson in. Brett's sort of been the conduit between all these medical meetings and all this information coming into us, and then putting it back out in the form of social media or on our website. Brett, we're on, what are we on, guidelines, COVID 7.0? Is that what we're on right now for the guidelines we have online?
Yeah, the return to both house guidelines are on version 7.0, correct.
Great. So why don't you take us through that and let everybody know, how those have evolved since the beginning.
Yeah, so as Susan mentioned, we formed a staff-based coronavirus response team in early March, that first week in March, right after the indoor national championships in Boston. And the response team, as Susan said, started by meeting actually twice a day for the first few weeks. And then we've scaled back to 3 times a week at this point, or as needed if things come up in between those days. We also formed a coronavirus working group in March, The group has met regularly since then and continues to provide feedback and updates and updated recommendations as needed. And this working group includes members of USRowing's Medical Commission, 5 doctors, including one who's a member of the FISA Medical Commission, both national team and domestic USRowing staff, as well as board members. I should also mention that one of the doctors in our group is also a referee and also involved in infectious disease. So that's kind of the base of our medical group that's been helping us along with these guidelines. Our return to training guidelines were based initially on recommendations from the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee in consultation with their medical doctors. Those guidelines were then vetted and signed off on by our medical commission, and they include input from both FISA and the CDC. They're very similar to the NCAA and the National Federation of State High School Associations guidelines. And as Susan mentioned previously, they can be found on usrowing.org in our features scroll at the top of our website. And that has been in the scroll since the beginning of March. Susan also mentioned earlier that we continue to have regular meetings with the USOPC, and they recently recommended using the Harvard Global Health Institute website, which you see here on the screen, to track infection rates. A lot of different information out there, and this is one of the most easily digestible of all that information. It includes infection rates per county, daily new cases per 100,000 people, the 7-day moving average, and has a 4-color system to help everyone make informed decisions based on their risk level. Our event guidelines were also based on recommendations from the same groups and organizations, as well as the WHO guidelines for event hosting. In conjunction with several other sports federations, FISA helped develop an online risk tool, a risk assessment report tool and risk mitigation recommendation tool. It can be found at item.worldathletics.org. And this is a really good assessment report tool that you can put all your information in about your regatta, whether it's a small 2-team regatta or a national championship level regatta, and they will give you a risk assessment report and make suggestions on how you can decrease your risk at your event. As part of our guidelines, all LOCs and event planners must develop a risk mitigation plan, which includes a medical plan that is specific to COVID-19. Must appoint either a chief health officer or a medical advisory committee that has the decision-making authority on your event. Just as an FYI, USRowing has not registered any regatta since the start of the pandemic. We have had a couple of regattas apply. One was not approved. One decided not to continue with their regatta. But we have not had that many regattas that have actually applied to be registered since the beginning of March, middle of March. And those guidelines can also be found on our COVID page.
So before we get into the insurance considerations, these guidelines, you know, it seems like we've all heard guidelines, recommendations, you know, all these different words: would have, should, you should do this, you could do this, and so on. I want to introduce Richard Hull from the Northwest. You know, the Northwest, of all the regions and that I've been hearing back from in the last, 7-8 months, have done a phenomenal job working together. You know, whether it be being responsible or being accountable to each other, they've done a great job taking all these various guidelines and putting them together and sharing with each other to set some very safe standards for their athletes and their clubs. So I wanted Richard to come on and talk about how he's gone about going through the different guidelines, whether they be from us, whether they be from their state of his state of Washington, the Department of Health, and so on, and put them all together, and also talk a little bit about how you guys have shared this information amongst all the rowing teams in the Northwest.
So great, Chris. Thank you. And yeah, it was interesting when we spoke about talking here. I mean, I think I'm very much just representing what's been a lot of hard work by a lot of people here in the Northwest. And I think we've all, much as all clubs across the country. We're trying to figure out how to create a rowing experience that has value for our athletes and makes the economics work, while also keeping coaches motivated and engaged. I think that the one thing that's really struck me is that as a region here in the Northwest, our primary conversation, the primary goal of what we're trying to do, and where the conversation's really centered around, is how to be safe and how to be responsible members of the local and broader community. And that's kind of the trumping and starting point, if you like. I know it causes a lot of stress and there's other dimensions, but that's kind of where we're starting. So I do just want to say that, completely recognize that I'm giving a very local, parochial view here. The situation in the US, across the US, and each club being different, each state, each region being different, range of different beliefs of what's going on and how to navigate it. So one of the key tenets that we've had as we've talked amongst coaches within the Northwest is very much to be of the mind that we're sharing information and not trying to make a rule set or determine what other people should be doing. So please take anything I share here in that spirit. Just real quickly, and this came up when we were chatting earlier today, Chris, which is if you look at Washington, was an early epicenter for COVID in the US way back when. That certainly got folks' attention, and I think it made us perhaps even more attuned to messages around that broader community responsibility when we saw people dying in our community. So like many, we went into that initial lockdown. When we came out, we had a phased reopening with different counties in the Northwest, in the state of Washington, and similarly in other states in different phases, depending upon infection rates and other factors. We then, when we had the spike in July, that was all paused and in some cases rolled back slightly. Then in October, there was a whole new approach to youth and adult sports that looked at risk level of the sport and risk level of the county. And crew was actually designated to be a moderate risk sport. Although we can, when we talked to the DOH, they've agreed that rowing a single is a low risk sport alongside golf. And then this past weekend, we had our stay safe, stay healthy rollback of our phased reopening, which is a very nice way of saying back into lockdown for close on a month. So we still have some things that we can be doing, but that's pretty much where we're at. And just for the state of reference, just to give people some context as to where we are, I think Washington is the 7th lowest state in terms of cases per 100,000 in the last few days. So we have average of 15 new cases per 100,000 of population per day right now, 1.5, and about a 7% positivity rate. So not great, but a whole lot of places are struggling there as well. So, so talking about how we put our protocols and guidelines together, and then how that worked out from a regional perspective, which I think is one of the more interesting aspects here. Leo, like many others, we created a return to water plan and some protocols. We based them on our state and local requirements, plus then USRowing's recommendations. So some sort of Vulcan mind meld, if you like, kind of melding the two together. We ended up doing a lot of sharing and copying amongst clubs in the Northwest. And then also Matt Loger pulled together a group of some great folks from across the country and sharing there. We were able to, I think, get some really good thinking in there. You asked me earlier, Chris, where do we find the USRowing recommendations helpful? I think it was really in 3 areas, one of which was communicating core principles to each other and to members in our club. The get in, train and get out approach was very helpful. And then it really kind of emphasized our 4 pillars of don't come to the boathouse sick, mask at all times, staying 6 foot apart, and then kind of excessive hand washing before, during and after. Helped us rowize, if that's a word, the more general state guidance and rules. And then it really also helped us as we're engaging. We've had a number of conversations with the Department of Health to really explain what the national governing body recommendations are, and then seek clarity on then how to interpret state rules in terms of rowing. So that's been super helpful. Within the Northwest, a lot of those conversations have taken place. They started up right after we locked down, informal coaches conversations, Zoom, a weekly Zoom call. It's now bi-weekly. And I think one of the key things that kind of came out of that was a sense that we were best served by moving together as a region. That if different clubs, every club was going to have to make their own decisions, but to the extent that we weren't putting pressure on each other by trying to rush into team boats in one area where other people felt singles were more appropriate, there was no one really, in inverted commas, policing that, but in good Northwest style, we had just a really good conversation about it. And kind of by and large, most Northwest clubs have only rowed in singles and household doubles throughout. There has been, or there was a little bit of limited experimentation with some social doubles when the infection rates were low enough. But I think we're pretty much all, to my knowledge, we're all back into singles as of this weekend. Just actually, it's a shout out. There's, I think, some excellent, strong informal leadership in the region. So you have people like Patrick McGovern and Helen Tillman from Pocock, and Nick Haley at Rose City, and Mark Davis at Sammamish, and Rick Brown, who was in Rogue but then fled to sunny Florida, and others. And I think it's these one-on-one conversations, but then these team meetings, team things where we share ideas, share information, pool resources, not trying to make regional rules in any sense. So in addition to the sense of let's move together, one of the other things that's come out of it has been kind of a regional sense that, yes, we need the protocols. That's absolutely important, and we have to have those right. But then it's as much about education around those protocols, motivating people around them, positively reinforcing how that happens. So I know regionally and then within clubs, that's been discussed quite a bit. And then good conversation about, right now it's less about competition and winning, and it's much more about filling a social need for many of those high school athletes, as well as being an exercise opportunity for both youth and adult rowers. But then obviously, you know, competing is part of our sport, and it's highly motivational for a large number, but not all. So we've had a lot of discussions about how to run safe, responsible singles scrimmages, piloting some of that this past summer and fall, and then a regional conversation about how can we create almost like an approach for the region next spring that will include smaller clubs in that process. A sense that if we can all work together, then we're going to end up with a stronger region as we come out from the pandemic, and that we just don't want to be leaving people behind, and that if we can support them, then we'll do everything we can. So that's basically the long and the short of it. Chris, I don't know, are there any?
Well, I'll say that it's been remarkable watching the Northwest. So shout out to them, the communication you've all done with each other to hold each other accountable, but in a positive way. And I think, you said it early, where you addressed your part of community as a whole, not just the sports community or the rowing community, and there was a responsibility. So what I will say also about Richard, everybody, is that Matt Logue has had executive director meetings every Friday for 6 or 7 months now, every Friday. And we stockpile a lot of information. And Richard, there's a whole folder there that we could share, is there not? If people were to reach out. And then I think a lot of regions will be interested in what you guys come up with having really small boat regattas in the spring for the region. So you may see a lot of traffic on your email coming your way with that.
Great.
So I'll give you a couple minutes to put your email in the chat. Otherwise, I'll do it in 5.
Okay.
So
I'd just like to point out the picture behind me is this is the Northwest. We have sunny skies and flat water at all times here. So that's what makes it all.
Look at that. You'd think you'd be faster. Okay, so right now, just obviously we all know that insurance plays a major role in this, and I think a lot of times we don't know what we don't know, and so we have somebody who does know, and her name is Rachel Kelly, and she's going to go over, for those of you who have the USRowing insurance policy, there's some things you may not know. She's going to go over our policy with us a little bit and talk about and point out some things that are really important that we should know if we don't. So Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Just to get things going a little bit, I do want to provide a brief overview. Some of you may have already spoken to me, and if you have not, like Chris said, I'm Rachel Kelly. I am the insurance broker for this specific policy. I started about 1.5 years ago with Assured Partners, and really love incorporating rowing into the scenario. care a lot about it. So thank you for that. But with the brief overview of this specific policy, what you're looking at right now is insurance included versus third-party liability insurance. So when you guys log on annually, every year, when you go into redo your USRowing membership, what you're going to see is the option to have insurance included or insurance not included. And if you do have that insurance included, it's $12.31 every single year, and it renews annually. So that's automatic, and that's a luxury that you guys have through the association. There's constant transitions with your board members and those who operate behind the scenes. So you never have to worry about that slipping through the cracks. That's always going to be something that's taken care of. But I do want to make sure that you guys are aware that if you log on and you become a USRowing member in February, there is that 1 month gap that you're looking at with that regard. So it's crucial to stay on top of your membership with USRowing. I'm very adamant about this policy because it's grandfathered in with Philadelphia Insurance Company for 10 plus years. And what that means is you guys really have a luxury that a lot of other national governing bodies and other associations do not have, which is a broad form of coverage that really provides comfort of ease, and through more education, just being aware of that and working with Philadelphia Insurance and working with USRowing and Assured Partners from a risk mitigation standpoint. And then you'll see right there in terms of how it's embedded, United States Rowing Association, its members, its member organizations, registered regatta committees, all of the below that's listed. So again, to reiterate, you have the option, insurance included, making sure you're doing that prior to 12/31 every single year and going from there. If you go on to the next slide, we can step into this. I know that, to reiterate Chris and to reiterate everyone from prior, insurance has actually become the one good thing that's come of this, I will say, just to keep it positive, is that people are looking at their insurance more than they ever have before. I can promise you that with those who have reached out to me and others within our department. So continuing to spread that from there. But as you guys are aware, COVID-19 clubs and their respective members will not have coverage for any COVID-19 related lawsuits and or claims that may give rise to having participated in a practice and or an event. So keeping that in mind when you are going out and deciding if you'll be doing 8s, if you'll be doing 4s. And the mandates and orders, they have the same effect as a law for where you guys are. I know you're footprinted globally, as is Assured Partners. And all we do right now is we are strongly advising clubs to abide by their state, local, and federal mandates. All we can do is strongly advise and just be aware of the risk that you're presenting to your athletes when you do go out in 8s and you do go out in 4s. So just to answer that question and bounce back, will your standard coverage be declined if you accidentally fall outside of your mandate? I know it's an ever-changing situation. It can go from orange to red overnight now. We're all aware of just how this is unfolding and trying to stay up to date. So the long and the short of it is no. However, you are playing with the validity of coverage when that claim is reviewed. Believe it or not, insurance carriers aren't dying to throw their dollars away at each and every claim. So there's really a very, very strict set of things and procedures that they go through in terms of investigations. So just making sure that you're not even going to allow that to be something that comes into question should a claim arise. And then right there is just, this is the policy that you have on file with USRowing. And then you can bounce back. Thank you. How does our insurance tie into USRowing guidelines? This is another frequently asked question we've been receiving. So at the end of the day, the biggest tracker for Assured Partners as your broker is just to see that the specific club is a member in good standing. Should something arise, a claim occurs, the first course of action is going to be going on our portal and seeing if you guys are green lighted as a member in good standing. And if that's the case, then we proceed accordingly and we make sure that claim gets taken care of as quickly as possible. The ultimate oversight of any and all of the guidelines will be through USRowing, but I do really want to strongly emphasize how it's always been. The association has the right to suspend members who they believe are not abiding by the guidelines. So those guidelines are the rules of rowing, safe sport, safety expectations, USRowing policy manual, and anything else. But I do also want to emphasize waivers are tied to your policy. That is the one thing where the policy takes precedent, and that waiver will make or break where you guys stand in terms of the validity of your coverage. Unintentional error on your part, it's not going to be a problem. But if you guys are going out of your way and failing to maintain an adequate system, then you are going to be faced with a not great situation should a claim arise. And then there, yes. So another thing in terms of the policy language is going to be what's called sponsored rowing activities. And you're going to hear me saying that a lot. It's just the verbiage of the policy. That's how they're going to look at anything and everything from a claims perspective. How does the policy read? And one of the biggest things within your guys' policy as a US Rowing member with insurance is what's called sponsored rowing activities. So right below, you'll see sponsored rowing activities are defined in the policy as hosted and sanctioned regattas, coaching education events, member club premises and member club operations, including but not limited to camps, clinics, on-water practices, events, and activities other than those that are otherwise excluded. That last sentence is going to be very important because you'll see in the parentheses there, i.e. regattas that are not sanctioned through US Rowing. So that trickles back up to hosted and sanctioned regattas. So your on-the-water practices, your day-to-day activities are what I like to call your continuous coverage. You can have your rowers go into the boathouse, take the boat out of the wreck, and not fear of a slip and fall causing anything that's going to be financially disruptive to your guys' specific club. You can go on the dock, it extends to the dock, it extends on the water. And then you also have what's known as the on-premise coverage that's tied to your policy. So for example, going back to that slip and fall when they went to take the boat out, all of the above. But something that also causes sometimes a little bit of hesitation is, okay, so what if I want to take my club a member out and have them go on a run? And that's technically not on our premise anymore. I want everyone to look at the on-premise as almost an additional benefit. So you still have the luxury of going on that run, doing your alternative workouts, and feeling safe with that regard. And then duels and tries are also considered on-water practice, and they do not need to be sanctioned in order to have coverage. So that is essentially Philadelphia's way of saying they see your duels and tries as on-water practices. So another conversation that keeps coming about is, okay, with the state of what's going on currently and in the foreseeable, what are we doing in terms of alternatives? How can we keep our rowers engaged that's not on the water anymore? And how does that play into the insurance that I have through US Rowing? So you're going to see within the policy, these are a list of exclusions that are the what not to do. So I hate to break it to you guys, but rodeos, concerts, if you have a fantastic singer and they're putting on a show, or bungee jumping, all of the above, you'll see that a lot of them are out of the scope. It's nothing that you guys, I'm sure if you guys had a board meeting and grass skiing was one of those, then I apologize. But if you guys want to go do any of the above situations, such as the snowshoeing that Chris Chase does with his team members as well, then you guys are good with that regard. But as you can see, there are a lot of moving parts and some things apply, some do not. So just to add, but revocalize that, please give us a call and we'll talk to you about it need be.
Rachel, can I just say something real quick?
Yeah,
If
of course.
you are doing a scrimmage, 2 or 3 team scrimmage, and let's say you meet somebody halfway at a park in Pennsylvania, just because you may be covered on the insurance policy doesn't mean that you don't have to get the proper documentation from, like the state park that you're in. If you're going to go and race there, you still need to get a permit. You still need to be doing things the right way wherever you happen to be having that scrimmage. So there, make sure that you're not overlooking some things just because you think, well, it's less than 3 teams, so this works. There are still things that you may have to do to make sure that you're in line with the local rules. And then the other thing, Rachel, is what about things like team bonding stuff, like going apple picking or doing things with your team that aren't rowing or practice related?
Yeah, of course. And with those regards, the coverage will extend to those situations. But speaking to the apple picking, I know Chris and I had this conversation. If you go apple picking as a team bonding situation, that coverage does extend. It's not the original intent, but the beauty of this policy and the fact that it's grandfathered in is you have these luxuries to be able to go and extend some of your activities more so than you would with another policy or another situation. Now, does it get gray when you bring in your family members and you begin to take advantage of the luxury of this policy? Those situations would complicate it a little bit. So for example, don't go apple picking and say, oh no, you know what, it's not bring a friend in terms of coverage. So extending it to family members and trying to go that route with it will cause a little bit of a disruption with how they perceive that coverage. So keeping that in mind as well.
Rachel, there's 2 questions in here that are very similar in the chat. One is, what if you practice at a different site than your boathouse? And the other is on premise if a club or individual does not own the site, example, they use the public park, are they still covered?
Yes, in both of those instances you are, and that's what's so great. So typically what you'll see a lot of people do, and if you are an insurance included member, you reach out to Assured Partners. And what we do is you would supply, because a lot of them, they're going to request proof of insurance in order to operate and or use that rental area. And you would reach out to us and we would need the name of them, their address, their zip code, and then we would supply that certificate if it's for rowing related activities. And then what was that second one, Chris? It was relatively similar.
It was basically, if you didn't own it, you were, if you practice out of a park, but you didn't own your site, are you covered then?
Yes, and
are there
again,
any
same,
connections?
excuse me?
Are there any connections? Like, do you have to get a rider for the park, or, additionally insured or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's all going to be dependent upon that specific park and what their rules and regulations may be. I can tell you that it's a frequently asked question to supply those, and we do that. Relative turnaround is going to be 24 to 48 hours if you guys go and request that certificate. And we do supply the riders as well for that and name them as the additional insured.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, of course. And then just stepping into, so the last previous slide was, I don't know if there's another question we can jump back in, but just to finish up in terms of the sanctioned regatta. So what I was speaking to before, that continuous coverage, that's going to be your day-to-day activities. Now we're stepping into almost that more restrictive scope of coverage with regattas and sanctioned regattas. Are your athletes covered when you go to specific events? The thing that we want to emphasize and educate is just because you are a member with insurance does not mean when you go to any and all regattas, you can use that coverage and that coverage is valid from a master's policy standpoint, because it's not. You're stepping outside into a different arena. And in order for an event to be covered through a USRowing insurance policy, it will need to be sanctioned. This requirement is necessary in order to obtain any proof of insurance and other requested items from Assured Partners. So with that regard, you would work with USRowing to get your event sanctioned, and we would go through the portal just to confirm that you guys have the green light. You are sanctioned with whomever at USRowing is going to coordinate that and go from there. If it is not sanctioned through USRowing, that means the coverage has been obtained elsewhere. So I don't also want to put this fear in anyone's mind that just because it's not sanctioned doesn't mean there's not coverage, but it's important to keep specific things in mind when attending a non-sanctioned event, asking specific questions and being aware, is it strictly covering the premise and local park, et cetera, that needs to be listed as an additional insured? Does it cover participant versus participant instances should a collision occur? Does it include only incidents that arise while racing? And as we move forward and continue to educate and to have this conversation from an insurance standpoint, we want to start incorporating signs throughout events for the upcoming 2020-2021 season to ensure that you are aware of USRowing's involvement from that coverage perspective. And again, just to reiterate, you will not be covered through USRowing's policy during regattas that are not sanctioned, regardless of your club's specific status. And that does not mean that there's not coverage, because typically in order for these events and these hosts to have you and run these operations, there's going to be a policy in place. It's just being aware and asking the questions and really understanding the value of what this specific policy with USRowing and Assured Partners has, because it really, the scope of coverage is just something that, again, you would not be seeing nowadays. If you were to go and try and find the coverage that you get as an insurance member with USRowing, you would not be able to find it in today's hard insurance market. It was hard prior to COVID. And what that means is it's just difficult to place. These insurance carriers don't want to deal with high risk scenarios, which unfortunately is the perception with rowing, just because of the lack of understanding and all of the behind the scenes situations that they may not understand, having not been a rower or been engrossed in this world. So continuing the risk mitigation and continuing to just make sure that you realize what you do on the day-to-day is affecting not just your club, but everybody in this association. We are all in this together from a risk mitigation standpoint, and making sure that you realize that every single day it's our policy. And it's really a great, I'm almost too passionate about the perks of this. So if you ever want me to keep chewing your ear off about that, give me a call on my cell phone and we can go into it at any and all hours. And that's that from an insurance standpoint with that regard. So I'll leave you with that and we can go from there.
Well, thanks, Rachel. A couple of things I want to note that these aren't new. The insurance and the coverages and what is covered and isn't covered these aren't new things. They've been in our policy for years. I think that what COVID has brought out is situations where we ask a question that you never thought about before, like, hey, if people from my team go to a regatta that's not sanctioned, are they covered? And we've had that happen recently, right? And no, they're not covered. And I don't think people knew that. So I do want to say, that tonight these questions are great because a lot of them just haven't openly been asked, and there hasn't been a forum to get an answer. So it's important that you ask them and we get answers. The other thing is, this isn't just about the pandemic. If you think about what the other sports, gymnastics, for instance, recently, and wrestling and equestrian and all that are going through, Rachel, I'm pretty sure that insurance companies don't want to cover NGBs or amateur sports anymore because, look at all the things that can happen, but that's just a statement. What we're going to get into now is our US Rowing Referee Corps. And so Sarah's going to come on. Sarah's the liaison with our judge referees. And Sarah, why don't you come on and talk about the complexities working with our judge referees, how complex it is to even talk about regattas, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Can you hear me? All set? Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so I will kind of echo what the previous speakers talked about. The referee committee and the Corps have been meeting at their monthly or bi-weekly meetings to talk about exactly this and how the Corps is dealing with the lack of regattas and what to think of when we do come back to events, both safety-wise and numbers-wise. So just to kind of give you like a perspective of where we stand right now. So a large number of our referees are in that high risk population and have noted so. Our US Rowing referee course, we had a back to regatta survey and that was similar to the youth survey that previously went out. And about 20% of our referee corps population has ultimately decided that they do not plan to work events in 2021, no matter what the case is, no matter what the safety precautions are, just because they rightfully so just don't feel comfortable being in large crowds or traveling. A good majority of our referees do feel more comfortable working regional events, and that is a very hot topic of what we talk about during these committee meetings of how we can keep our regattas very regionally based, which means an easy drive to the event, an easy drive back to your home, and potentially a drive back to that regatta the next morning. So limiting as much travel, interaction, and staying elsewhere as possible. One other request and requirement really from the entire referee corps is that moving into regatta season, US Rowing owned, US Rowing registered, or any other regatta, they are going to be requiring single occupancy in hotel rooms for good reasons. A lot of our, or all of our referee corps, they are essentially volunteers. They are volunteers, and they don't necessarily always know personally the person that they may be staying with in the hotel room. So this is going to be a top requirement coming into the 2020 season and potentially beyond until we have a vaccine for COVID. Something that you can find right now going into the 2021 season, if you go onto our website under the COVID-19 results or the COVID-19 prevention page, you can find the modified referee procedures for COVID-19. And this goes into what the referee corps has looked at as adjusting kind of safety procedures, adjusting areas like weigh-ins and what that means for cleaning the area, socially distancing the area, what it means for control commission of how referees are hesitant to be putting their hands on every boats and coming into close contact with athletes in various other positions as well. So I'll say too, noting that kind of 20% decrease in referees, US Rowing is continuing to work to increase that referee corps. So while we're all on it, I will put in a plug, starting to apply for a candidate. That is something that you can do 100% right now. While we cannot do any, you can't do any ride-alongs at regattas, of course. That is something you can go ahead and apply for and get your background check and safe sport and start to meet the other regional coordinators. So that's something you can go ahead and apply for. And then that will help us be able to come out of 2021 or come into 2021 when we are able to host events to have a bigger population to choose from there. I want to emphasize too, kind of going off of Rachel's statements, our top priority is to ensure the safety and ensure that our referees are covered by our USRowing insurance coming into 2021, as always, but especially this year. So for our referee coverage for USRowing owned and sanctioned events, they are fully covered. USRowing takes full responsibility under Rachel's previous explanation. If a referee does decide to work a non-registered regatta, they are not covered by any USRowing insurance, and that is 100% on the LOC or the event managers there to communicate and ensure to the referees that they are being covered appropriately. So one thing from the committee perspective, from the referee committee perspective, we are strongly encouraging the referee corps to either not work non-USRowing registered events, and if they do so, ensure that they are asking the key questions that Rachel brought up to make sure that they are covered if something does happen. And that communication will be going out. Again, it continues to go out, but the communication of exactly what questions to ask is definitely something that we will continue to push over and over and over again. So we ensure that our core is staying safe out there.
The other thing I wanted to add, and about this is that not only do we have 20% saying they're not comfortable working, but our referees are concentrated in a certain number of areas. So it's not like every region has an equal number of referees already to handle their regattas. A lot of them are concentrated in just a couple of areas. And so the travel across state borders and the whole bit is going to be even harder. Rachel, real quick, there were two questions in here that were asked. And what about weightlifting or other cross-training activities? For example, if you're having your kids lift weights, but you've never had a certificate in your life on how to teach lifting weights, and we're doing weight-bearing stuff with the kids, is that a red flag for the insurance company?
So the long and the short of it with the red flag is no, they're not going to have a certification requirement in the policy that's going to hinder the coverage either which way. But I will say with that regard, you need to make sure that if you're doing these weightlifting activities that you are doing them together and as a group, regardless of whether it's 5 at a time or there needs to be some supervision to some extent, because what happens is I don't want there to be this notion that you can go and have a CrossFit membership and go and do all of these listed activities and feel as though the coverage is extending to the USRowing policy, because it's not. It needs to be a supervised situation where whatever is taking place is discussed internally with those coaches that are leading the charge with that.
That's actually a perfect segue into winter training, because bringing the athletes into group work in rooms is going to be what we're going to talk about next. But real quickly, what about boathouse activities like fundraising events or boat christenings that include community members? Is there coverage when those things are happening?
So the long or the short of it with those is those are where you should be reaching out and having a more detailed discussion with us at Assured Partners. There are a lot of scenarios and moving parts with specific fundraisers. We've had 75% where the fundraisers can move forward accordingly, and then the other 25 where there's a little bit more that needs to go into it. So just reach out, get the specifics. We work with Philadelphia and just input it from there.
Great. Somebody just asked, and do 2 and 3 team regattas need to be sanctioned? And the answer is they don't need to be sanctioned. They're considered scrimmages in the eyes of the insurance. That is true, correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
So what we're going to do now is move on to winter training. And Brett, come on back in and let us know about the guidelines for what we're soon to be facing for winter training.
So yeah, just first, the return to training guidelines that we have do include indoor training recommendations. While we all know and have heard the 6 feet, social and physical distancing rule, our medical doctors and everybody on our committee and what is in our training recommendation is for indoor training sessions or settings that should be 12 feet. And it's really important to provide that extra space between the ergs and other equipment. And that is something that should be really emphasized as we head back indoors for training as the winter season comes on. I know somebody had asked a question about aerosol studies, and while I am not aware of one that's specifically for rowing, this is something that our medical commission has talked about, that extra distance um, because of that the spray that can come off when you're exercising. Athletes and coaches and staff should be monitored at least daily. Um, that can be a daily intact form. It can be temperature checks. Could be self-monitoring. At the USRowing training centers, we're doing daily intake forms twice a day, once prior to the morning practice and once again in the afternoon, and temperature checks. Uh, you can set whatever kind of criteria you want to monitor with your particular situation, but the athlete, coach, and staff health should be monitored daily. All organs and equipments must be wiped down with disinfectant before and after every use. That's really important as we start to move back indoors and we're sharing more equipment. Clubs should designate a person to manage their return to training protocols. And any individual that has had high risk contact with a person or has been sick or diagnosed with COVID-19 must report that to the club's designated protocol manager. And then your own individual organization's COVID policies would go into place at that point.
So let me, thanks for that, Brett. And that's, that works perfectly with Matt. You're the executive director of Three Rivers, very awesome club. I mean, they've been doing this for a long time. So have you. You, practically speaking, have had to put guidelines into physical form and take in all the considerations and factors in deciding whether or not you're going to have winter training. And you made this chart. Would you explain this to us?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, echoing what a lot of people have said, like the information, there's a lot of it out there and it changes frequently. So just keeping up with the most relevant information, excuse me, has been an obvious priority in determining how winter training and how any back to rowing is going to work for us. So kind of feeding off this chart, it's kind of a little bit of an equation that I've kind of grown organically to kind of hopefully encompass all the information needed to make an effective decision. So the risk factors we all know, and is all very specific to our respective counties and regions. Capacity limits, again, it's going to be a unique factor based on where your training space is. We have two campuses with various floor plans. So knowing the square footage, understanding what the airflow in the general space is going to be, how many training spots, how many spots per day, what are the limitations there. The HVAC and airflow system, particularly, do you need to have windows open? Do your windows open? Do your HVAC system have the appropriate recommended filters for this type? So understanding all of that well before trying to schedule any practices definitely is a big factor in the equation. And from an operational standpoint too, we got to be realistic about what those limits may or may not be. We're all taking a financial hit this season. How much is it going to cost to run indoor training effectively? Like, if you can only fit 4 people at a time inside your building, does it make sense to heat it and staff it and clean it for the entire winter? Or has it become a losing proposition on that side? So everybody has the ability to make that decision on their own, but these are definitely factors in the broader equation. Understanding what the inside cleaning protocols are going to be, and making sure you have the inventory for that. We have an internal standard at Three Rivers since the pandemic started to make sure we have 6 months of cleaning supplies on hand at all times. In the event that there's another cleaning supply shortage, there was actually a news story here this morning about people making a rush at Target and taking all the wipes and paper towels and toilet paper again. So if we're going to be hosting on-site programming, we're going to need to make sure all these pieces are in place. And then the communication systems is an incredibly big factor for us, in the sense that we have to be able to communicate quickly and effectively if a change needs to be made. So understanding how each team communicates, understanding where the parents and how all of those factor into the equation as well. And then staying up to date with all the resources that are out there, and making sure that even though they're all guidelines, they are put together by caring and professional people and taking those very seriously, and making sure that we're living up to those guidelines as a whole. And there's always going to be X factors in that equation. We put on there, for us, it's, travel restrictions, which have been changing by the day within our area, school district status as well, when especially dealing with a club team with kids in different school districts, and then just the current unknowns. I mean, there's still a lot out there. So basically, all of that factors into the general equation. And then it's really up to the organization and the organizational leaders to commit to a transparent course of action. And the way we've manage that at Three Rivers right now is once all of these factors are considered, we make a decision and we communicate a timeline of that decision, when that decision is going to be revisited. And our standard throughout the year has been 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks after a big decision is made, we'll revisit all of the factors and see where we stand and make another announcement. And that's proven to be very calming, I feel like, for our membership and our participant. They all are always aware of when things will change, if they will change at all. So it takes a lot of guessing. It really helps manage the expectations, both of the athletes and of the organization, and allows for safe operations, we believe. And it's so far, it's been incredibly effective for us.
Yeah, I think a major part of this is knowing what your local rules are. I mean, in some cases you have the state saying you have to do this, or deferring to the counties, and the counties are saying you have to do this if this. And then you get a lot of conflicting ones. I know in Texas, the governor made when the governor makes out an order, it's not a law, right? But it stands as a law. And so, somebody said, well, it's not a law, and the local judge said, I'm not going to follow that. Well, if the governor passes an executive order, it's the equivalent of the law. So I imagine, Rachel, and you can jump on here anytime, and I think in one of your slides I saw where an executive order is the equivalent of a law. You have to follow. You don't get to pick and choose the ones that you want to use. There's a state that, we say, and I know that we're catching some flack, like we're not being firm enough or consistent enough. We are. You have to follow your state. Your state flops around a lot. That's your state. That's not USRowing flopping around a lot. And that's the nature of the beast. We can't impose one rule for all 50 states when all 50 states have different rules. So, like if your state says you have to follow, if we say you have to follow your state rules, and your state rules say here are rules, but if your NGB has stricter rules, you have to follow your NGB's rules. Well, that seems like a circle, but it's not, right? It's actually finite. We say follow your state says follow us, your NGB if it's stricter. Well, guess what? You have to follow our NGB now. So, I think, Matt, the variety of spaces and rules, like looking at capacity limits and all that might change municipality to municipality or county to county. And so I think it behooves everybody to absolutely understand you can't pick and choose the rules you want. I mean, it's pretty specific which ones you have to follow. So we had a question right here. We're going to go on from here. Beatrice, this is a perfect time for you to come in because, looking ahead of the spring, clubs would right now be making hotel room reservations and lining up buses and vans for regatta weekends in the spring. Like this is like the time that we would do it, right? Because we're building our budgets for the spring and figuring out all the logistics. You're at CRI. It must be a nightmare trying to figure out all the moving parts of a place that has 2,800 members and 45 different sets of programming. What are you looking at? What kinds of things Matt just showed us how he looks at winter training. What are you looking at in trying to figure out ahead of time to be ready for the spring?
Yeah, so the spring is really the big question. Like that's nobody knows what it's gonna look like when we get through winter training. One of the things that we've been doing a lot of is working in short cycles where we can. And so we had a 4-week cycle of programming this summer, and then another 4-week cycle of programming, and then fall was like 7 weeks, and then we had a 3-week cycle. And so we're handling programming bit by bit, because everything is changing so fast with the COVID spread and the local regulations around it. When it comes to looking ahead to those things that you can't really wait until the last minute, like buses and hotels and all that, we're starting to communicate a lot with, especially places where we've been before, staying in the same hotels for a lot of regattas, or the same bus company, and getting in touch with those vendors and seeing sort of what are our options there. Can we put in a tentative plan? At what point can we cancel the whole thing with no penalty? Do they need us to wait? And so taking advantage of those relationships that we already have to sort of start the communication, because nobody knows. Like, the bus company doesn't know if they're going to have weddings and field trips and all that kind of stuff again. And so everybody's just sort of talking quietly and trying to figure out what those next steps are.
Beatrice, do you find yourself rewriting or making special policies for a pandemic? Like, like, you can't, a bus can fit 54 people, right? But you can't put 54 people on a bus with this proper spacing. So do you reach a point where you say, look, normally we would need one bus for 54 kids. Now we need 3 buses for 54 kids. Or, guys, we just mathematically can't make this trip work. Are you already planning, and what is your timeline for, making decisions that will impact kids in the spring? Like, we run into this problem, like, if we tell everybody now there's no spring, then nobody will sign up, and then it'll crush us economically as a club. But if we hold on too long and people sign up and then we get told you can't go, that's a whole different set of problems. Like, do you find yourself rewriting the policies or your protocols to say, look, guys, this is what we're looking at. We'll make a call by this date, and so on.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a lot of the work that we have cut out for us this winter. There's tons of examples besides just 54 people on a bus, right? Like, how many people can you put in a hotel room? How many people can you have around the food tent at the same time? How far will you let participants or their parents drive themselves to get to a regatta? We have a policy from the past that we won't ask people to drive to a regatta that's more than an hour, drive themselves to a regatta that's more than an hour away. Well, if we're asking them to drive an hour and a half, but it means that they get to go to the regatta instead of us canceling it because we can't afford to get 12 buses, then is that worth it? And so those are sort of some of the questions that we're asking ourselves a lot this winter. For a lot of our decision making, even just at the sort of the whole club level, we've sort of been taking it with the big 3 questions. The first one is, can we do it? Either do we have the budget? What are the current local regulations? What sort of setting the stage there? The second one is it what the people want? Do our community members want to go to this regatta or participate in the sport in this way? Is it something that they feel comfortable with? And then the third part is it a good idea? And that's where sort of we take a step back, we sanity check it, we say, sure, we can, and people want us to, but is it actually in the best interest of what we're trying to do? We've been relying on those 3 questions for a lot of our decision making.
I like it when you say we sanity check it, because common sense isn't really common these days, and we get into all other arguments about whether or not we should do something because we can't be controlled by COVID. Well, yeah, but the other side of it's pretty bad. Do you how, back to the question about winter training, how are you guys looking at winter training as well, being such a big outfit?
Yeah, so that goes back to the short cycle times. So we did a survey in September of our community and asked them sort of what they were interested in terms of in-person versus virtual or Zoom-based training. And then based on that information and our sanity check of what we could and couldn't do, We ran a 3-week pilot program in the month of November, and that really gave us a lot of information about what people were looking to sign up for. Going forward for the rest of this winter, most of our adult programming is going to be over Zoom, and our youth programs are going to be primarily Zoom based, with a small number of days per week at the boathouse.
Matt, I have another question for you. Your community runs a club, right? A community club, but it also has high school programs out of it. Have you had any interactions where the high school policies are different from your club policy because they're based on something different, or where one is tougher than the other, or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, we have 3 high schools that row out of our club, but as affiliates that row out of our club, they're held to our standards and our protocols for rowing out of there. Same with the colleges that row out of there as well. And all of the high schools understand the gravity of the COVID situation and have been very positively responsive to it. But that being said, they've also taken different approaches to their season, in the sense that one high school, didn't have any singles, so they had to wait until they got out. We did our protocols for the fall, actually all year, were singles only and household team boats, and that stayed through the fall season. One high school chose to leave Three Rivers for the month of October and row someplace else where they could row fours and other boats. Another high school would do team boats on the weekend at another location as well. But anybody that rowed out of a Three Rivers campus during the year was held to our protocols. And while they were on site, all of the high schools understood the situation, understood the community aspect, and it just wasn't their team. And even though there may have not been any cases at their school, they were a part of a broader community, which really helped make the situation, keep everybody safe and keep everybody on the same page mentally through the seasons.
Rachel, can I call you back in here for a quick sec? Let's
Yeah,
say
great.
Beatrice talked about Zoom workouts. Let's say that you're doing a lifting workout, right? If a team has Zoom coach monitored workouts on Zoom, and the coach is sort of watching everybody, right? Would those be covered? Would that be considered supervised?
So in that instance, what's going to happen first and foremost is it's going to be access to the homeowners that these individuals have wherever they may or may not be working out from home, I guess you would call it. So it's an access policy in that instance, and it's going to trigger their homeowners first and then go through the motions in terms of subrogation, wherever the case may be from there. So keep that in mind as well when everyone's dispersed and doing the Zoom calls.
Rachel, stay on if you would.
I'm not going anywhere.
Back at one of your first slides, Sarah, could you go back to maybe her first slide, where could you revisit the slide? Very first slide, I believe, addressed insurance coverage for operations with respect to municipal, county, state rules and guidelines.
Which one is it, Rachel?
I do believe it's the COVID-19 one, correct? Is this the
Okay.
correct slide that the individual was looking at? Yes, okay, perfect. And then with regard, I don't know if there was a specific question or just wanted to take another glance at any bullet in particular, Robert? And then just, I mean, again, to reiterate, while that's being typed out, if it is, at the end of the day, you're looking at an annual policy from an insurance carrier who has agreed to a contractual obligation. So at the end of the day, they're essentially saying, will they, for example, let's go peak end of March when everyone was supposed to. Seems as though if you are not within local guidance, you are not covered. Is that right? So it's not a matter of, we can't say you're not covered. It just cannot be said, because at the end of the day, like I just said, it's a contractual annual obligation from this insurance carrier. But what's going to happen in terms of the way it works is a claim arises, right? And I'll just speak to a hypothetical and we can go from there. It's the end of March, you take an 8 out and there's a collision that occurs on the water. they're going to go through the motions in terms of a claims investigation, and they'll bounce back, and to which they will speak to the point of how is it possible for an 8 to have had this incident occur if they are not locally allowed to be out on the water right now at this specific date and time, as to which you are saying that this occurred. Does that make sense? So that's exactly the string of events that's going to occur. I can't sit here. There's no one in particular where I can give you a definitive case that occurred. But that's what you're looking at in terms of the type of risk you're exposing your athletes to, is knowing that they're going to fight that tooth and nail.
Rachel, so, our guidelines, we only use the word, Susan, we only use the word must twice, right? In our guidelines. And one of them is your coxswains must have a face mask. Your coxswains must be covered. And I mean, obviously, look at this right here. There is no virus, or there is no policy that covers COVID. So you couldn't be taken to task or sued for that anyways. But what about if you're out every day? I mean, there are clubs that are rowing 8s and 4s, and we can debate that, right? That's a separate thing. But right off the bat, they're not even using a mask on their coxswains. That's one of our only musts that we have. Does that constitute, in the insurance company's eyes, a failure for duty of care, or the oversight that coaches are supposed to be showing, or clubs are supposed to be showing? Like, could that factor in to any of these, if anything should happen?
It could to some extent, but that goes back to where the must would be tied strongly and heavily to the USRowing guidelines. And just if that realization, or if it comes to fruition that that's been a frequent situation that happens, then just recommending that somebody gets in touch with USRowing, expresses their concerns, so that you guys can internally decide where to go from there. I can't say that because they aren't wearing a face mask, they won't be covered for colliding into another boat and or whatever other hypothetical we could have fun with. I know we all love the hypotheticals, but no, long and the short of it is that it'll be a factor, but I can't tell you how much that factor will weigh into the scenario.
But Susan, they could be suspended or have their
Exactly.
if they're a repeat customer, right? They could have their membership suspended or revoked if they're going to continue to break our only musts.
Right. And what we would do is reach out to the organization. We would give them, we would explain to them, what has been communicated to us. We give them a cure period, and, expect to, have them brought into order relative to our safety expectations. And if they are not, then there are other things that we can do, like suspend their membership for a while, or if it happens, frequently, then we would revoke their membership. And one of the things I just want to add, Rachel said it before, and I think it's really important, and that is, this is our coverage. It's the coverage for all of the members. And so understand that, if you have some clubs that are, that have frequent claims, or that are seen as putting their athletes in harm's way, then has an effect. That has a premium effect. We are working with Philadelphia. I think Rachel can even say this, that we have been working a lot closer with our clubs to try to manage these instances, especially during COVID-19. And Philadelphia has responded very well, because, one of the things that we want to be able to do is to offer this coverage at a price that clubs can afford. And what is happening is what they call a hardening of the industry. And when this industry hardens, then the prices go up. So, understand that when we are trying to work with these groups, we're trying to manage a situation such that we're able to provide a policy and insurance coverage that everyone can afford.
Well, one of the things I want to point backwards at is in the beginning, we talked about, the various things, the guidelines that we have for COVID and for safety and all this. We have a safety page, and it is actually really good. And I think one of the statements on the safety page is the second sentence that says that in your safety policies, you must have at a minimum all the things that you see here. So on our page, it says you have to have at a minimum all the things that you see here. So, I mean, one of the things you might want to do is go back and check just your simple safety policy. Not your COVID policy, but your simple safety policy. Here is a great question. And I think everybody identifies with this around the country when COVID first hit. If a team loans or leases ergs to rowers for home use and supplies suggested workouts by email only without a Zoom practice, is there an insurance issue?
That goes right back to the homeowner situation that I spoke to. Where they got that erg from or that equipment that they are using in order to partake in that, it's not going to play any different role. So if they blow their back out or are doing an activity that they deem was occurred because of their coach, or they believe that their coach pressed something that was making them feel as though they were injured, they can submit that claim. It'll just go through to two different instances, the homeowners and then also the USRowing as an excess.
We have one more slide that we have to get to. And I was thinking that this was the last one. There we go. Where's the, don't we have one more slide, sir?
Yes, this is the one you're talking about, spring possibilities.
Yep. So Brett,
Great.
could you come in and let us know about this?
Yeah, so just to follow up on some of the things that Beatrice was saying, just to let you know where we are with the USRowing owned events for the spring. We're in the process of speaking with all of our LOCs for the 2021 owned events to understand their capacity to host an event next year. And it's a current snapshot, and it obviously is changing regularly, but the things that we're talking with them specifically about are their state and local governments outdoor gathering size restrictions, their ability to obtain event permits from their local authorities, and their capacity to host an event due to staff age changings because of layoffs and furloughs and other things. So those are all things that we're talking to them about right now. And we'll continue to talk to them as we get closer and closer to what hopefully will be a spring season. We're also looking at our member clubs interested in capacity to attend regional or national events. A survey went out a couple of weeks ago, and I'll let Sarah jump in real quick here and tell you a little bit about those results.
Yeah, definitely. So the survey went out last week. All of the results very much differed per region, and that was our intention, to understand where each region was really coming from. It is very much, as we've talked about, it is very much everything's changing at this point, but people want to stay local. The other item that really did jump out was that the majority, I would say over half of the people that did fill out the survey are in singles and or same household doubles or pairs. So that's a commonality there. It of course breaks down into some higher percentage and lower percentages depending on the region. But we understand that the majority right now are in singles, and that will definitely be taken into consideration per region when we talk about appealing to each region's kind of needs coming into the spring season. So I would say that is one of the biggest takeaways. The other one is that, of course, there is a ton of uncertainty right now, but the limitations of travel has increased even more due to, of course, COVID worry and, of course, resources.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And the last thing on this slide, last thing we'll talk about from our own events perspective, is we're currently in the process of developing event-specific COVID protocols with our medical commission, starting with our first events, which are national team related, our National Selection Regatta 1 and our Olympic trials, which are toward the end of February. And we'll be looking at those on an event by event basis based on size of the event, the type of boat that would be scheduled at that event, et cetera, and making event specific protocols for all of our US Rowing owned events. Chris?
I'm absolutely amazed that we haven't gotten to 8:30. We thought that this was going to be a 4-hour webinar. So I'm stunned. I almost don't know what to do. That's because our boss is on and there's no shenanigans tonight. All the other webinars have been filled with shenanigans, but not this one. Susan, there are some questions in here that as Chief Domestic Officer, I'm going to say, have at it.
Yeah. I see one question. Have you had to remove / suspend any programs membership? The answer to that is yes, we have. Let's see. Have there been?
Go ahead.
Have there been any reported examples of COVID spread at a rowing program due to team boats? Again, we've heard anecdotally that there has been spread. We don't know if it's been due to team boats, but we're keeping on top of all of this. And again, you know, things for certain. What we know is that things are going to change, and you know, cities and states are in the last couple of days are locking down. Maybe not as tight as what they did back in the March, April, May timeframe, depending upon where in the country you were. But that is happening. And then, you know, we will see what happens. I suspect we're going to be seeing in January sometime more of a federal mandate. So we'll be looking towards that too.
Question, Beatrice, did CRI row 8s and 4s this fall? Somebody wanted to know.
No, we didn't even do any doubles. We were all in singles.
Thank you for that. Can we give some serious thought to clear and consistent categories? That sounds heavenly, yes. And we already are talking about things like, you know, U15, U17, U18, or U19, and so on. But CH, remember, it's not always US Rowing not wanting to do that. It's every region with their own gurus leading that do it their way. And, you know, you don't have to go any further than looking at the definition of novice. I mean, even within regions, you have states that have their own rules or leagues that have their own rules. So it's not just us not having a clear, consistent set of categories. We're trying to be all things to all people, and that stinks a lot. So it's not just us. But you have noticed that we have the U15 and U17 championships now. You are seeing more and more regions switch over to the U15, U17, U19 model than before. So this is happening, probably not as quickly as some would like, myself included, but it is happening. Let's see here, Chris. Hey, Chris, is US Rowing also talking to non-owned events? Yes. We worked with non-owned events to do the fall series. We are working with sites that we don't own anything or any infrastructure or any part of the site. We are working with places that host regattas and looking how we can work with them if there's a chance to alleviate some of the stress and strain of hosting regattas. Yes, the answer is yes. We are looking to work with LOCs across the country, whether we have previously or whether we own anything there or not. So the answer is yes. Any discussion on having a standard testing procedure, at least regionally? Well, we do have 6 regions, and they do have regional boards, and so they have been, they've already been vetted and there's a whole Facebook group for them. And so if there are regional things, and when you say standard testing, do you mean 2K, 6K? What are we talking about for testing? Are we talking about COVID testing? I don't know how to answer that question, anonymous attendee. If you want to rewrite it, cool. What do you think would be the guidelines if we have regattas for the spring? Oh, good Lord. Look, I don't even know where to start. They said we might hit 400,000 deaths by February, and now they're saying by the end of December. Things are spiraling so fast, and we are our own worst enemy because we can't seem, as human beings, in talking about what we want to do, we can't seem to think about what our responsibility is today in order to make spring happen. And the people who are arguing about all these things about bringing people together already are part of the reason why the spring might not happen. So, and they're the first people, that want to know about spring. So it's interesting. Again, another anonymous attendee. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know if any of my people on this committee do. Things are happening so fast. I only know where we're standing today. It's really ugly, and we are actually getting worse quicker than worst case scenario logarithms are saying that we should be. That's how fast we're spiraling out of control. So, standardized COVID testing. How many days prior to the event? This is an interesting question because I'm working on camps for next summer right now. And one of the hard parts about answering this question is one of the things that I'm facing is if I brought in people to a camp, so regatta would be the same thing. You're supposed to take 2 tests and they're supposed to be 24 hours apart. So that means you have to have single occupancy rooms for all the people that show up for at least 24 hours until they take a negative on the second test. And I don't know if regattas could do that. I don't know if teams could afford that, or and so on. So the complexities of doing that testing, that standard testing, availability will be part of that answer. What if you're halfway through regatta, a massive regatta, and you test half the people and they run out? What do you do with the other half? They're there, like they drove planes, trains, and automobiles. Who knows? Like, I don't know if we could. I don't even think we have the juice, Susan, to talk about standardize anything in the medical field.
Well, and again, I think what we're going to see is, along with the vaccines, we're going to see the availability of tests increase, and also testing technology. Again, anecdotally on the news last week, I heard that saliva tests are getting to be really good and as accurate as the nasal swabs. So, right now things are happening this very, very quickly. And, for us to be out in boats and, a strong spring season, spring/summer season, we're going to have to get testing under control as well.
Susan, here's a question. Or Brett, even if one of you guys knows the answer to this. If your county is yellow per Harvard graphic, are clubs and schools within that county cleared to row team boats under standard protocols by USRowing insurance rules? Clarity, please.
Want to take that one, Brett?
Yeah, so if you're in the yellow, again, USRowing isn't recommending team boats right now. We're not recommending, it's not a must. If you're in the yellow and your state and local guidelines are permitting outdoor group activities of that many people, then you can row, yes.
I would put the caveat in there with the global map. So you've got the color yellow. They also give you indication of the trend. So if you are trending up, then what you need to do is just keep on monitoring, the color. Yes, yellow will, Brett explained it very well, but make sure you're looking at that second column and monitoring that, because if it's high, then what that's telling you is that the trend is going the wrong way.
Question.
Bush mentioned in the chat that rowing is a high contact sport. That is correct, based on the respiratory signature. So if you're looking at state and local rules, rowing should be considered in the football, basketball category due to the respiratory signature. So thanks, Mary, for bringing that up.
There's a question here about how do we intend to identify potential junior national team athletes? Good question. Been dealing with this day in and day out for a couple weeks. It is our intention to do something organized for teams and for juniors across the country for January, February, March. And that would be like having the JNT put out a training program for those months, having a place that you could, if you're an individual athlete training on your own, or if you're part of a team and you want to put in your scores, that there'd be a portal that you could go in and put in your stuff. And we're not going to, I don't think that we're going to be able to do any kind of physical ID camps where people show up. Those are usually done in January, February, March, and I just don't see that happening. So what we'll probably do, again, another anonymous attendee, we'll probably have that available that you could put in your times. There already is a portal on the USRowing website that male and female athletes can go to and put in their scores. They can update that as much as they would like. It goes to a spreadsheet that the coaching staff will have, and that is probably going to be your best way. I can't speak for U23 or senior, but that would be how the juniors do it. I think seniors are already where they're supposed to be. U23, I'm sure we'll have stuff come out of that. Let's see here. We're in the center of a growing rowing region, say that fast, that is normally used to holding 90% or more of its spring regattas at our site. We did contained racing events within our boathouse complex this summer and fall, but have had a lot of interest from other teams. Yeah, I can tell you right now, you're going to get a lot more interest. The more you do it with success, the more teams that are going to want to come, and then you're going to have all kinds of politics that'll be fun to play. But with allowing one or two regional teams to car top, that comes down to space. That comes down, I mean, you've got to answer a lot of questions there, Jacob. For instance, you're from New York, so we have 200 acres to play with. If we spaced out a few trailers, very, very far apart, if we scheduled, gave everybody their own dock, scheduled drone time to launch so that there was no interaction, possibly. If you're talking, I'm assuming you're talking small boats, singles and stuff, or or family doubles maybe. Again, it's all going to be speculation. We're looking, what's that, 6 months away? Especially if you're talking New York. I mean, our ice doesn't even break till April, so who are you kidding? But I would say that you'd have to figure out the space part of it. You'd have to make sure that there's no interaction. There's so many things you're going to have to figure out in the moment then, but I don't think any of that's going to be answered now. You can plan for plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, but again, insurance is going to stop you right at 3 anyways. You go more than 3 and you're a regatta, you're not a scrimmage anymore. Chris, are there any hard deadlines? Yes, there are. And they're all different. I wish I could give you one answer. The different states let out. I mean, in New York, we go through school all the way through June. Florida's has already been done for a month and a half. So there are a lot of deadlines for the scholastic teams. For the junior teams, not so much. But remember, you have kids going from scholastic teams to junior teams at the end of the scholastic season. So what are the exact junior teams? This is why Cincinnati has the rule it has, because there was a region when all the high schools ended, they would all flood the local club, and the club became a super club overnight. And so we ended up making the rule that you had to be on your team from January 1st. So I would say that there's some things there that would have to come into play. If USRowing sanctions the regatta, but it does not happen for reason-related changes in COVID guidance, will there be a refund to the host? Susan or Brett or Sarah?
Yeah, I can answer that. The short answer is yes. So either in the form of a refund or potentially pushing that to the whatever is the balance on your account for other membership organizational dues or potential regatta fee that is coming up, that would be the case. And that is what happened in 2019 spring too. So there are plenty of LOCs that were registering their regattas, and of course those didn't happen. So that was pushed to 2020 or what would happen in the future.
But those refunds were because of COVID guidance. Peter's asking if it does not happen for reasons related. It does not happen for reasons related. So would we still, what are we refunding? just, will there be a refund?
I read that as, but it does not happen due to COVID.
Yeah.
Then yes, they would be reimbursed or applied to a different amount or different area within their organizational dues or whatever that may be. The short answer or the easiest answer is definitely give us a call. You can call me or Tracy, and we can talk you through it. But yes.
Wasn't it 7.14 per 100K? Yellow is nowhere near that. Anna, you must be talking to a previous example, right? I'm guessing.
7.14 was the equivalent to what the Johns Hopkins study was, or the Johns Hopkins site was. That was the Harvard Global equivalent. Yellow is under 10. And yes, that was a change from the USOPC on the recommendation.
Is the 50 cases per 100K population rate criteria previously in place now completely shelved in favor of the Harvard Global Dashboard?
Yes, the recommendation is the Harvard Global Dashboard at this point.
Let's see here. Jaden, if you're talking about the link to input scores, it's right under the U19 team on the USRowing website. You can go there and find it. It's at the bottom, and you can follow the link and put your scores in. If that's about the junior national team, which I'm assuming it is. What will be required to clear the entire rowing community to row team boats in the spring? Oh my goodness. I wish I had the answer. Oh my gosh. What is USRowing looking for explicitly in terms of COVID metrics? How do we get to be where we need to be? I think, Anonymous, these are great questions, and they transcend our sport. Richard was talking earlier about our responsibility to the community as a whole. And if we don't have healthy communities, then we're not going to have healthy athletes. So coming out of them. So, I mean, I wish Brett, Susan, do you want to, I don't know if we can apply any specifics to this.
No, there's just a lot of unknown. And I think we'd just be guessing. We need to take one step at a time, and right now we're in the middle of it blowing up. So I think we would just be punning. We don't know, and I'm hoping that we have more to say within the next month to 2 months. But honestly, I don't think we're going to see a lot of change until after the first of the year.
Yeah,
It's
it
just
will.
my gut.
We will endeavor to have another one of these as we continue to change. We'll try to keep communication going as quickly and efficiently as possible. In some cases, things change so fast. We could have a meeting today, and tomorrow morning we could wake up to lockdown. So, I think we've got some hurdles to get over. How many weeks would USRowing need to mobilize to get permits and host a regional championship regatta in the current situation?
That's going to depend on the local venue. In our conversations that we have with some of our LOCs, it can be done within a week, getting the permit. So it's really about having the time to put on a regatta, not necessarily the permitting situations. And in other region, the permitting situation can take upwards of a month. So it really just depends on the region.
Is USRowing recommending that athletes wear masks while erging during indoor winter training sessions? Take the 12-foot distance between ergs as a given.
That is not part of our current recommendations. I can't tell you anecdotally that that I know of a basketball coach that is doing all major Division I college basketball coach that's doing all of their practice in masks, despite the fact that they would not be playing games in masks. But that is not part of our recommendations at this point. I think it's up to the individual and up to your club whether you want to mandate that.
How is the national team training going with intent to compete in Japan? Olympic Games. Ooh, this is a sore spot. So our national team athletes training for the Olympics less than a year out are probably the last place in the country to move out of singles. So they were pretty frustrated about that. Yeah, so they're moving ahead, but again, they're in the same situation as everybody else. They were all in singles, so yeah. How is it going for them? It's going, but I'm not sure that it's that great. You know what? We are 17 minutes past. I certainly appreciate all your questions, and we're at a point now where there aren't any left. So we're going to take this point to sneak on out. I want to thank all of you guys on the panel here. You all brought something so important to everybody that needed to be said and heard, and questions that needed to be asked by all of you guys who joined us tonight. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and be safe. Wherever you are, be safe.